A $275,000 wheelchair had been inspected by 4 specialists and declared perfect every single time. So, when it rolled through the door of Donovan Pierce's small garage on the east side of Portland, nobody expected anything different. Donovan was a 40-year-old black single father who fixed cars and took in mobility equipment on the side. He had no advanced certifications. His tools were second-hand, and his lighting was older than some of his clients. But the moment those wheels crossed his concrete floor, he heard it, a small catch, barely audible, repeating with every rotation. Not loud enough to alarm anyone, just wrong enough that he couldn't ignore it. He asked the woman in the chair where it hurt. Her assistant answered instead. Donovan didn't look at the assistant. He crouched down to eye level with Sabine Laurent and asked again. Later, when he removed the armrest panel to check the drive mechanism, he found a folded piece of paper tucked inside the hollow casing. He opened it. "I have been in pain for 9 months. Everyone says the chair is fine, so I've stopped complaining. Please believe me." He read it twice. Then he looked at the wheelchair sitting in the middle of his garage, worth more than his house, and made a decision that could cost him everything. If this is your first time here, consider subscribing. These are stories about ordinary people who do extraordinary things, not because they had everything, but because they chose to act when it mattered. This is one of those stories. Donovan Pierce had been running the garage for 11 years, and in that time, he had learned that most problems announce themselves before you ever put a hand on them. A car with a failing alternator hummed differently at idle. A brake caliper starting to seize pulled left on deceleration before the shutter began. A timing belt nearing the end of its life ticked in a way that was easy to miss if you weren't listening for it. Donovan was always listening. It was the thing he did without thinking about it, the way some people read faces or remembered names. He read sound. The garage occupied a converted auto bay on the east side of Portland in a neighborhood that had been slowly changing for a decade, but hadn't quite finished deciding what it wanted to become. The building was functional and nothing more. The lighting was a patchwork of fluorescent tubes installed at different times by different hands. The waiting area held 4 mismatched chairs pushed against a cinder block wall, and the floor was bare concrete, worn smooth near the lift. Donovan had replaced the compressor twice, and the diagnostic equipment once. Everything else he had kept running through patience and familiarity. He worked from early morning until after dark most days. The garage brought in enough to cover the lease, the business loan he had taken out in year 3, and the cost of Miles's school. What it did not bring in was extra. There was no extra. There hadn't been extra in a long time, and Donovan had made his peace with that. Miles Pierce was 9 years old and understood, with the particular clarity of a child who has grown up paying attention, that his father carried a weight that was not discussed, but was always present. He did not ask for things that weren't necessary. He did not complain when plans changed. And every weekday afternoon, he walked the 6 blocks from school to the garage, dropped his backpack in the corner near the side window, and did his homework at the small folding table Terrence had set up for him. Terrence Boyd had been working alongside Donovan for 8 years. He was quieter than most people assumed a mechanic would be, precise with his hands and economical with his words, and he had placed the folding table and the small desk lamp in Miles's corner without being asked, simply moved them there one morning and never mentioned it. Miles had thanked him once. Terrence had said it was nothing. That was the extent of the conversation, and neither of them felt the need to revisit it. The arrangement had started the previous year when the cost of after-school care had become something Donovan could no longer justify. He had sat Miles down and explained the situation plainly, the way he explained most things, without softening it past the point of honesty. Miles had listened, asked if the corner spot was permanent, and when Donovan said yes, had gone to get his backpack. The matter was settled. Donovan's second line of work had begun 7 years earlier, and it had begun because of his cousin. Marcus had been injured in a construction accident that left him with a spinal cord injury and a secondary hospitalization 3 months later, not from the injury itself, but from a pressure sore that had developed because his wheelchair's seat cushion was positioned 2 degrees off from where it should have been. The chair had been fitted by a certified technician. Every measurement had been documented. Everything was within the manufacturer's specified range. Marcus had told his physical therapist he was uncomfortable. The therapist had reviewed the chart, confirmed the numbers were correct, and suggested Marcus might need more time to adjust. He ended up in the hospital for 11 days. Donovan had watched that happen and filed it somewhere deep and permanent. He started reading about mobility equipment. He asked questions that vendors found annoying. He took a repair course intended for certified technicians and completed it without the certification that was supposed to accompany it. He began accepting wheelchair repair jobs from friends of Marcus, then from their friends, then from people he had never met who had heard his name through channels he couldn't always trace. His method was specific. He did not evaluate equipment in isolation. He required the user to be present, seated in the device, performing the movements that made up their actual day. He asked where it hurt. He asked what felt different from 6 months ago. He asked what they had already told their doctor or technician and what response they had received. He wrote all of it down in a spiral notebook before he touched a single adjustment. He charged what the work cost him in materials and time. He did not charge more than that. He was not certified to do what he did, and he knew it, and he did it anyway, because he had watched what happened when someone was told their discomfort didn't appear on the diagnostic readout. Sabine Laurent had been running Laurent Medical Systems since she was 31 years old. The company manufactured and distributed medical devices across 14 production facilities in the Pacific Northwest, orthopedic supports, post-surgical recovery equipment, assistive technology components. She had inherited a struggling mid-size operation and had turned it into something that could not be easily categorized or easily dismissed. 4 years ago, a car accident on a wet highway outside Seattle had damaged her spinal cord at the thoracic level. She had been unconscious for 2 days and in intensive care for 12. When she was discharged, she was told she would not regain motor function below the waist and should plan her life accordingly. She had returned to her office 11 weeks after the accident. This was the fact most people mentioned first when they described Sabine Laurent, the speed of the return, the refusal to stop. What they mentioned less often was what that decision had cost her and what she had learned to conceal in order to sustain it. She had become expert at projecting competence from a position that other people continually unconsciously treated as diminished. She had sat in rooms where people addressed her assistant rather than her, where eye contact was made with whoever was standing rather than whoever was in the chair, where conversations waited until she had been helped through a doorway before resuming as if she had not heard everything said in the interim. She had stopped correcting it after the 2nd year. The energy required was not worth what it returned. Her wheelchair was a custom-designed model built by a specialty manufacturer in Switzerland. It had taken 4 months to produce and had cost $275,000. It included an electronic stabilization system, automatic tilt adjustment, and pressure mapping sensors built into the seat. She had been told by every person she had paid to tell her that it was the best available. She had been in pain for 9 months. The pain was located beneath her left lower ribs and spread into her left hip. It began after approximately 75 minutes of sustained sitting and increased from there. It did not wake her at night. She spent enough time out of the chair to allow some recovery, but it returned each morning, predictable and patient, within the first 2 hours of her workday. She had reported it 4 times to different people with different titles, and the response had been consistent. Her physician had ordered imaging. The imaging showed nothing new. Her rehabilitation specialist had reviewed the chair's pressure mapping data and found the distribution within acceptable parameters. A physical therapist had suggested core strengthening exercises, which she was already doing. And a service engineer from the Swiss manufacturer had flown in, spent an hour and 40 minutes running diagnostics, and told her the system was functioning within all specified tolerances. He had then asked in a tone he clearly intended to be gentle whether she was experiencing significant stress at work. She had thanked him for coming. She had not mentioned the pain again after that. Instead, she had written a note. She had done it late at night alone in her office, in handwriting that was smaller and less controlled than her usual. She had folded it twice and pushed it into the hollow space inside the armrest panel of her wheelchair, the small cavity behind the access cover where no one would look unless they were disassembling the component. She had not told Yvette. She had not told Julian. She had not told anyone because there was nothing left to tell. She only knew that someone would eventually open that panel for some reason, and she wanted someone to know. The call to Donovan's garage came through a referral from a former client, a retired firefighter, whose scooter Donovan had repaired 18 months earlier. The firefighter had mentioned Donovan's name when he heard about the issue with the drive mechanism, had described him as someone who listened more carefully than most, and had offered the number without being asked. Julian Cross. Sabine's executive assistant had made the appointment under protest. He had arranged for the chair to be evaluated by credentialed specialists 3 times already and saw no strategic reason to bring a $275,000 device to a small auto garage run by a man without the appropriate certifications. He had said as much. Sabine had told him to make the appointment. They arrived on a Tuesday morning, Sabine in the back of a black SUV, Julian in the front, Yvette Sloan beside Sabine in the rear seat. Yvette had been Sabine's primary caregiver for 3 years. She was direct by nature and uncomplicated in her concern, and she was the only person in Sabine's professional circle who consistently asked how Sabine was feeling and then waited for the real answer rather than the functional one. Donovan heard the sound before the chair had fully crossed the threshold. It was a catch, small, rhythmic repeating once per wheel rotation on the left rear. Not mechanical failure. Not a bearing about to go, just a deviation in weight transfer, the kind of thing you felt in your hands before you heard it, if your hands had spent enough years listening. He did not say anything yet. He watched the chair complete its path across the concrete floor and noted where the frame settled, how the left side absorbed the landing from the small ramp at the entrance, whether the automatic tilt engaged on both sides at the same rate. It didn't. The left lagged by a fraction of a second. Julian introduced himself and provided documentation, manufacturer specs, recent service records, notes from the Swiss engineer's visit. He spoke with the efficiency of someone who had already decided the trip was unnecessary and was managing it to its fastest possible conclusion. Donovan looked at the documentation, then he looked at the chair, then he looked at Sabine. "Has the chair been causing you any discomfort?" Julian answered. "All settings are within manufacturer specifications. The service records show—" "I wasn't asking you." Donovan said it without heat. He crouched down until he was at eye level with Sabine. "How does it feel after you've been in it for more than an hour?" Sabine's expression shifted slightly. It was a small movement, a brief pause before the practiced response, but Donovan had spent enough time asking questions that people didn't expect to notice the distance between a real answer and a rehearsed one. "It's fine," she said. He waited. Yvette, standing to the side, looked at Sabine but did not speak. "Where does it hurt?" Donovan asked. The question landed in the room differently than the first one. Julian stopped mid-breath. Yvette went still. Sabine looked at Donovan with an expression he couldn't fully read, something between relief and caution, as if she wasn't sure yet whether the question was real or another version of the same performance she'd been through before. She answered. "Beneath the left lower ribs, spreading into the hip. After about 75 minutes. Getting worse over time. 4 evaluations, no finding." Donovan nodded and asked to keep the chair overnight for a full inspection. Julian objected to leaving a device of that value in an uncertified facility. Sabine told him it was fine and that he could head back to the office. She and Yvette would arrange their own ride. Julian hesitated briefly, then gathered the documentation copies he'd brought and left. The matter was settled before he'd fully decided whether to push back. She came back the following morning with Yvette. Donovan had spent the previous evening reading whatever he could find, going through the documentation Julian had provided, the manufacturer's technical manual available through a professional database he subscribed to, and a research paper on pressure distribution variance in custom-fit seating that he had read twice and annotated in the margins. He needed Sabine present for the next stage. He asked her to sit in the chair and go through the movements that made up her average morning turning to reach her desk, shifting her weight to look left, extending her arm toward a control panel at shoulder height. He watched for 53 minutes. The left lateral support, the padded component designed to keep the trunk upright and distribute pressure away from the ribs, was positioned at 4 degrees of inward angle. Based on Sabine's current trunk dimensions and the contour of her left side, the appropriate angle was closer to 7 degrees. The difference was 3 degrees, which was within the manufacturer's accepted variance range. It was not flagged as an error. It had never been flagged as an error because technically, it wasn't one. But Sabine had undergone reconstructive hip surgery 14 months before the wheelchair was fitted. The surgery had left her left iliac crest, the upper ridge of the hip bone, approximately 13 millimeters higher than her right. And 7 months ago, she had lost nearly 11 pounds during a severe respiratory illness. The weight loss had reduced the soft tissue padding on her left side, which meant the support that was already not quite right had become measurably less right. The foam was no longer making adequate contact. The load was not being carried. Her body had been compensating, tilting right to relieve the pressure on the left, and that compensation had begun loading the right hip and lumbar region in ways they were not designed to sustain. For 9 months, her body had been solving a problem that a 3-degree calibration error had created, and in solving it, had created 3 more. Donovan adjusted the left lateral support by 3 millimeters. The adjustment took 4 minutes. It was within the scope of what he was technically permitted to do. He asked Sabine to sit again. She settled into the chair. He watched her shoulders. After about 10 seconds, the left shoulder, which had been carried slightly higher than the right for as long as he'd observed her, dropped a 1/4 inch. "That's better," she said. The words were quiet and almost surprised. He told her it was only partial. The compensatory posture she had been holding for 9 months had redistributed load across the entire seating system. To correct it properly, he needed to adjust 6 contact points, recalibrate the tilt mechanism, and replace 2 components showing early signs of wear that no one had identified because every prior inspection had checked against specification rather than against the body currently using the chair. He did not tell her he wasn't certified to do it. He went to the armrest panel to measure the drive housing clearance. When he removed the access cover and reached inside, his fingers found a folded piece of paper wedged against the interior casing. He opened it. He read it. He stood in the middle of his garage for a moment, holding the paper, looking at the chair. Then he thought about Marcus. He thought about Miles doing homework at the corner table. He thought about the loan payment due in 18 days and the insurance renewal at the end of the month. Then he thought about a woman who had hidden a note inside her own wheelchair because every other way she knew to ask for help had stopped working. He folded the paper carefully and put it in his shirt pocket. He went back to work. He sent Miles to his sister's house that night and closed the garage. He had told Terrence there was a private evaluation running and that he'd need the bay cleared by 6. Terrence had asked no questions, which was one of the things Donovan valued most about him. He had simply nodded, finished what he was doing, and left. Donovan locked the front door, pulled the secondary work light over the center bay, and began. He started with the documentation. He read through Sabine's surgical records, which Julian had included in the service file, apparently without reading them carefully, and cross-referenced them against the chair's original fit measurements. The chair had been custom-built based on a body assessment conducted 22 months ago. In those 22 months, Sabine had undergone 1 surgical procedure affecting her skeletal geometry, 1 significant illness affecting her body weight, and multiple postural adaptations affecting the way load was distributed through the seating system. None of these changes had been entered into the chair's calibration record. The chair had been serviced 5 times in 2 years. Each service had checked the chair against its original specifications, not against the body currently using it. He wrote this down in the notebook. Then he identified the 6 contact points that needed adjustment. The left lateral support already partially corrected, needing further recalibration to account for the full 3-degree deficit. The right hip bolster, which was now absorbing load it was not designed to carry because of Sabine's compensatory tilt. The lumbar support, which had been set for a trunk height that no longer applied after her weight loss, the footrest angle, which affects pelvic tilt, which affects everything above it, the position of the joystick control arm, which Sabine had been unconsciously reaching for, at a slight rightward bias, another compensation that had become habit, and the weight distribution curve in the tilt mechanism, which was currently loading the rear casters unevenly on incline. Each adjustment affected the others. He had to work in sequence and check the cumulative effect at each stage before proceeding. One miscalculation did not stay local, it traveled. He worked through the first 2 hours methodically, and then he made an error. He had been adjusting the lumbar support angle, bringing it forward by 4 millimeters to match Sabine's current trunk depth, and had calculated the resulting effect on sacral pressure based on the weight listed in the pre-illness records. He hadn't recalculated for her current weight. When he ran the pressure model forward, the numbers told him the adjustment would shift load off the lumbar region and place it directly onto the sacrum. He stopped. A sustained pressure point on the sacrum in a person with impaired sensation below the waist was not a minor miscalculation. It was the beginning of a pressure sore. And a pressure sore in that location undetected, because the person couldn't feel it developing, could become a wound serious enough to require hospitalization within weeks. He had almost made things worse in a way Sabine would not have been able to feel coming. He sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he took out his notebook and started the lumbar calculation again from scratch, using her current weight factoring in the corrected hip geometry, accounting for the compensatory lean she had been holding. The second calculation gave him a different number, a smaller adjustment, less intuitive but structurally correct. He made the adjustment and moved on. By the time he reached the tilt mechanism recalibration, it was after midnight. His back had begun to tighten from crouching, and he stood periodically to stretch and then went back down. He found the 2 corroding bolts while accessing the rear axle housing, small, early stage, not a current safety issue but a future one, and replaced them from his parts supply. He found the rear wheel wear pattern while checking axle load distribution. He found the footrest spring tension running low while adjusting the angle. He noted the drive motor's response lag in the diagnostic cycle and documented it separately with a note that it would require the manufacturer's service department within the next several months. He was not certified to service the drive motor. He documented it and left it. He finished at 20 minutes past 3 in the morning. The chair looked almost identical to how it had arrived. He had not added anything visible. He had not removed anything visible. What had changed was internal 6 calibration points, 2 component replacements, 1 documented future service item, and a tilt mechanism that now distributed weight according to the body that was actually going to be sitting in it. He put his tools away, turned off the work light, and sat in the waiting area for a few minutes in the dark before locking up and going home. Sabine came back the next morning alone. She had not brought Yvette. She had not asked Julian to accompany her. She had simply told him she had a follow-up at the garage and would handle it herself, in the tone she used when a decision had already been made and discussion was not part of the schedule. Julian had learned over 2 years to recognize that tone. She arrived in the black SUV transferred to her backup chair in the parking lot and came through the side door that Donovan had left unlocked. She told him she had spoken to the manufacturer's service director. She said it plainly, without preamble, in the tone she used for delivering information she knew would be unwelcome. The service director had confirmed that modifications to the seating support system fell outside the scope of any service agreement that didn't involve a certified rehabilitation engineer. Donovan did not hold that certification. The chair was a Class II medical device. Any modification made outside certified channels that resulted in injury or was alleged to have resulted in injury would expose the person who made the modification to full civil liability. The service director had also noted that a formal complaint could trigger a review of the facility's operating license. She looked at him and asked why he had done it anyway. Donovan did not offer a defense. He reached into his shirt pocket and took out the folded piece of paper and held it toward her. She looked at it for a moment before she took it. She unfolded it. She read it. She had written it herself, but she read it the way you read something you forgot you had said, with the distance of time and the slight shock of hearing your own voice when you weren't performing. He said, "You hid that because no one was listening. I found it. And I fixed things that aren't working right." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of something settling. Sabine did not look up from the paper immediately. When she did, her face had changed in a way that was not visible as emotion, but was visible as the absence of a particular kind of effort, the constant low-level work of looking like nothing was wrong. She told him she had reported the pain 4 times. She told him that after the 4th time, when the Swiss engineer had asked whether she was under significant stress, she had started to wonder if the question might be accurate, that maybe the problem was her perception, that maybe the chair was right and she was wrong. She had hidden the note because she did not want her staff to see her as a CEO who complained about pain that couldn't be measured, as someone whose body was making her unreliable. She had bought the best chair available. She had followed every recommended protocol, and for 9 months not one person had asked her specifically where it hurt. She refolded the paper carefully, the same 2 folds, and held it in her lap. "You could lose your garage," she said. "Yes," Donovan said. She looked at the wheelchair sitting in the center of the bay, the one he had worked on through the night. Then she looked at him. "Show me what you did." Yvette arrived 20 minutes later. Sabine had called her from the parking lot after the conversation with Donovan, and Yvette had come without asking for a detailed explanation, which was characteristic of her. Donovan had walked Sabine through each adjustment point, explaining what he had found, why it mattered, and what he had changed. She had listened with the focused attention of someone who understood the technical language and wanted to understand it more precisely. She had asked 3 questions, all of them specific, none of them rhetorical. He had answered them directly, and she had nodded and moved on. Now it was time to sit in the chair. Donovan stood back near the tool bench. He did not stand over her. He did not narrate. He understood that the next few minutes were hers, not his, and that his presence needed to be available without being intrusive. Yvette positioned herself to assist the transfer. Sabine moved from the backup chair to the recalibrated wheelchair with the practiced efficiency of someone who has performed a physical task thousands of times, economical, self-directed, neither asking for help nor refusing it when it was offered correctly. She settled into the seat. For the first several seconds, her body did what it had trained itself to do. Her weight shifted right. Her left shoulder came up slightly. The compensatory posture that 9 months of pain had built into her muscle memory engaged automatically, bracing for the pressure that had always followed. It didn't come. The left lateral support met her trunk at the correct angle for the first time since the chair had been built. The lumbar support contacted her back at a depth that matched her current frame. The footrest held her legs at a position that allowed her pelvis to sit level rather than tipping to compensate for the hip height difference. The tilt mechanism, when her weight settled, fully distributed the load across the seat surface the way it was supposed to, evenly, with no single point taking more than its share. Her right shoulder came down first, then the left. The set of her jaw, which Donovan had noticed she carried forward when she was managing discomfort, released back to neutral. She sat up straighter, not from effort, but because the chair was finally supporting the position, rather than forcing her to hold it alone. It took approximately 5 seconds. Then she turned left. It was a controlled movement, rotating her trunk to look behind her left shoulder, the kind of thing she might do to address someone at her left side in a meeting. For 9 months, that movement had pulled at the unsupported tissue beneath her left ribs and sent pain across her hip. She had learned to compensate by turning less, reaching, less, redirecting people to her right side when possible. She turned left and there was nothing. She turned back to center. Turned left again, held it. Donovan said quietly, "How does it feel?" She didn't answer right away. She turned back to center and sat for a moment with her hands resting in her lap. Yvette was very still. When Sabine spoke, her voice was level, but something beneath the level had shifted. It doesn't hurt." Donovan turned toward the tool bench and found something to look at. He gave her the room. She sat in the recalibrated chair for a long time without moving, not testing it further, just sitting in it the way a person sits when they are no longer spending energy on defense. Yvette pressed her fingers to her mouth and looked at the wall. Donovan organized a tray of tools that didn't need organizing and waited until Sabine was ready to go. She left without saying much. She thanked him once at the door in a voice that carried more weight than the 2 words usually did. He said she was welcome and watched the SUV pull out of the lot. After they were gone, Donovan sat in the waiting area with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and thought through the realistic possibilities. The chair worked, that was true, but it didn't change the legal reality, which was also true. He had modified a Class II medical device without the required certification. The fact that the modification was correct did not make the act of performing it permissible. If the manufacturer's service director had already been notified the documentation existed, if Sabine chose to file a complaint, the documentation would be used. He went to the office and pulled out the business file from the bottom drawer. He sat with the loan documents, the lease agreement, the insurance policy, and the certification paperwork, and looked at all of it for a while. If the garage was shut down, the loan came due in full. He did not have the money to pay it in full. Without the garage income, he had enough in his operating account and personal savings to keep himself and Miles housed and fed for approximately 6 weeks. After that, he would need to find work quickly, which was not impossible, but was also not simple when the only professional record you had included running an uncertified medical device modification service. He was still at the desk when Miles came in from school. Miles dropped his backpack in the corner, took one look at his father, and sat down in the chair across from the desk instead of going to his table. "What happened?" he asked. Donovan told him the short version. The chair, the adjustment, the risk, the fact that the woman in the chair was no longer in pain, and the fact that it was now up to her what happened next. Miles listened the way he always listened, without interrupting, without rushing to a response. When Donovan finished, the boy was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "But she's not hurting anymore, right?" "Right," Donovan said. "Then you did the right thing." He said it with the simple certainty of someone who had not yet learned to complicate the obvious. Even if it cost something. Donovan looked at his son for a moment. He didn't say anything. Miles got up, picked up his backpack, and went to his corner table. He took out his homework and turned on the small lamp Terrence had put there, and the garage went back to its ordinary sounds. The black SUV pulled up the next morning at 8:47. Donovan was in the bay doing a routine brake job on a customer's sedan. He heard the engine, heard the door, and stood up from the creeper, expecting Julian or someone who worked for Julian, carrying documentation that would begin the process of closing him down. Sabine came through the side door in her recalibrated wheelchair, moving across the concrete floor with the ease of a person who was not managing pain at every moment. She was carrying a folder herself. She asked if he had time to talk. He wiped his hands on a shop rag and said yes. She set the folder on the workbench, rested her hands on it, and looked at him. "My legal team has reviewed what you did," she said. "If I filed a complaint, your operating license would almost certainly be revoked." Donovan said nothing. "I'm not here to file a complaint," she said. She opened the folder. The folder contained 3 things. The first was a summary prepared by Laurent Medical Systems' legal team, confirming that Donovan had violated the service parameters of a Class II medical device, and that the grounds for a formal complaint were substantiated. The second was an investigative report compiled by Sabine's operations director, covering every mobility device adjustment Donovan had performed over the past 4 years. 14 cases. 14 people who had been told their equipment was functioning within normal parameters, 14 people who had continued experiencing pain or functional limitation that the official record did not reflect. The third was a financial summary of Donovan's business loan, balance, lease terms, equipment inventory, current operating account, $86,000 in outstanding debt. Equipment that was functional but not adequate for the scope of work he was actually doing. No capital for the certification courses that would have made his work legal. She had not asked his permission to compile any of it. He did not mention that. "You've been doing this work for 4 years," she said. "You've been doing it correctly, and you've been doing it in a way that puts everything you have at risk every single time." He didn't argue with that. "One adverse outcome," she said. "One case where something goes wrong, even something unrelated to your adjustment, and you lose the garage, you lose the loan, and you spend the next several years in litigation you can't afford." She paused. "You know that." "Yes," he said. "So I want to talk about a different way to structure what you're doing." She walked him through it the way she walked through business proposals, directly, without overselling, with the confidence of someone who had already considered the objections and found them manageable. She had identified a warehouse space 4 blocks from the garage, 4,200 square feet, currently unused, structurally sound, accessible. She had spoken to a contractor about conversion costs, a rehabilitation engineering firm about partnership terms, and her own compliance team about the regulatory pathway for establishing a certified adaptive mobility assessment center. She had done all of this in the 36 hours since she had left his garage. She told him she was prepared to invest $3.8 million. The money would cover the space conversion, the diagnostic and pressure mapping equipment, the electronic assessment systems, and the operating costs for the first 18 months. It would also cover the certification programs he would need to complete. There were 3, the longest of which ran 14 weeks, and a living stipend for him and Miles during that period. The existing garage would be retained and renovated, with Terrence managing the automotive side as a separate operation. She was not offering to buy his method or incorporate it into Laurent Medical Systems. She was not asking for operational control. She would hold a minority equity stake. Donovan would own and run the center. The only condition, she said, is that the center maintains a support fund for patients without insurance coverage. That's not a request, it's built into the structure. She closed the folder. Donovan looked at it for a moment. He said, "Why?" It was a genuine question, not a challenge. He wanted to understand what was driving the decision, whether it was gratitude or strategy or something else. Sabine considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Because I spent 9 months being managed instead of heard," she said. "And I have 14 production facilities that manufacture devices used by people who are going to end up in chairs exactly like mine. And I have been operating in that industry for 6 years without fully understanding that the space between what a device measures and what a person experiences is where most of the actual harm lives." She paused. "You understand that space. I want it to be a place people can access without it costing you your business every time." She let that sit for a moment. "And because what you did for me mattered," she said. "Not only the technical work, although the technical work was correct, but the fact that you asked where it hurt and then believed the answer. That is rarer than it should be." Donovan asked for time to think. She said, "Of course." She gathered her folder, turned toward the door, and then stopped. "I'm not asking you to become something different," she said without turning back. "I'm asking you to do what you're already doing with more tools and less chance of losing everything." Then she left. He told Miles that night. They were at the kitchen table after dinner, Miles still in his school clothes, Donovan with a cup of coffee and the folder open in front of him. Miles listened to the full account with his chin resting on his hand and his eyes tracking his father's face. When Donovan finished, Miles was quiet for a moment. "Are there a lot of other people like her?" he asked. "People who are hurting but nobody's figured out why?" Donovan thought about the 14 cases in the operations report. He thought about the woman with multiple sclerosis whose chair had been built for a body 6 years and 45 pounds different from her current one. He thought about the messages that came through referrals, people describing symptoms before they even made an appointment, because they weren't sure anyone would take the complaint seriously in person. "A lot," he said. "More than most people realize, because after a while they stop saying it." Miles nodded slowly. He looked at the folder, then at his father. "Then you should open the place," he said, not urgently, not dramatically, in the same matter-of-fact tone he used when he was explaining something that seemed obvious to him. "That's the answer." Donovan looked at his son for a long moment. "It's not a small thing," he said. "It means more responsibility, more people depending on the work. It means things change." "Things are already changing," Miles said. He picked up his glass and finished the last of his water. "You just have to decide which direction." He put his glass in the sink and went to get ready for bed. Donovan sat at the table alone with the folder and his cold coffee and the sound of the house settling around him, and he thought about Marcus, who had stopped asking after a while because asking had stopped producing results. He thought about the woman who had tucked a note into the hollow casing of her own armrest because she had run out of other options. He thought about 14 people who had been told their discomfort was within acceptable parameters. He thought about what it meant to have a method that worked and no structure to protect it. In the morning, he called Sabine. The conversion took 4 months. Pierce Adaptive Mobility Center opened on a Wednesday in late spring in a building that still smelled faintly of new drywall and industrial adhesive. The exterior was plain. The interior had been designed with input from 3 wheelchair users who had agreed to serve as consultants, and every decision about counter-height door width, flooring surface, and lighting had been made with function as the first criterion. Donovan had completed 2 of the 3 certification programs before the doors opened. The third was ongoing Tuesday evenings and Saturday mornings, which was manageable. He had hired a staff of 4 for the opening: Patrick, a rehabilitation engineer who had spent 8 years in a hospital system and was tired of working within constraints that prioritized throughput over outcomes; Renee, a certified assistive technology professional who used a power wheelchair herself and had opinions about the field that she was not shy about sharing; an administrative coordinator; and a technician who had spent 12 years in prosthetics and orthotics. Terrence ran the garage. Miles had a real desk now near a window that looked out over the parking lot. He came after school and did his homework, and over the following weeks became quietly acquainted with several of the patients who returned for follow-up appointments. He did not insert himself into clinical conversations. He had picked that up without being told. The first patient was a 64-year-old man named Gerald, whose power wheelchair joystick had been intermittently losing signal for 7 months. 3 service checks had found no fault. The most recent technician had suggested the issue might be related to interference from his home's electrical system. Donovan asked Gerald to operate the chair the way he did during a normal morning, reaching for a coffee cup, opening a door, maneuvering around the corner from his kitchen into his hallway. He watched Gerald's hands. The signal loss happened when Gerald's right thumb applied pressure to the joystick housing at a specific lateral angle, the angle his hand naturally fell into when navigating a tight turn. There was a hairline fracture in the joystick casing, invisible in static inspection, that created an intermittent break in the ground connection only under that particular load. The chair worked perfectly when a technician operated it. It failed when Gerald did, because Gerald's hands were not the technician's hands. Renee repaired the casing. Gerald went home without the dropout he had been told was probably environmental. The 5th patient was a 13-year-old girl named Cora who had been experiencing lower back pain for nearly 2 years. Her chair's frame was misaligned by less than 1 degree at the seat-to-back junction, a variance within the manufacturer's tolerance and unflagged in 2 annual service reviews. In a growing adolescent, 1 degree of sustained lateral load across several thousand hours of sitting was not within acceptable parameters for that specific body. It was within acceptable parameters for a specification chart that had not been updated since she was 11. Patrick corrected the alignment and referred Cora to a physical therapist who specialized in pediatric seating. At her 3-month follow-up, the back pain had resolved. The 8th patient was a 51-year-old woman named Diane with multiple sclerosis. Her chair had been custom-fitted 6 years earlier and serviced regularly and conscientiously by a certified provider who checked it against its original specifications every time. Those specifications reflected a woman who was 45 pounds heavier, had different functional reach in her left arm, and had not yet experienced the spasticity progression that had changed her postural baseline in the intervening years. Renee led Diane's evaluation. She spent 2 hours with her, asking questions, taking measurements, asking more questions, and used the pressure mapping equipment to show Diane exactly where the load was concentrating and why. Diane had known something was wrong for 2 years. She had been told the chair was fine. "The chair is fine," Renee told her. "It's just not your chair anymore. You changed. We need to catch the chair up." Diane laughed, not a response she had expected to have in a medical appointment. In every evaluation, the intake process began the same way. Donovan had formalized it not as a checklist, but as a sequence of questions that had to be asked in person to the patient, with enough time allowed for the real answer rather than the practiced one. Where is it hurting? What is hardest to do now that wasn't hard before? What have you already tried to explain to someone that didn't land? The answers were entered into the assessment file as primary diagnostic data, not supplementary, not anecdotal. The patient's account of their own experience was the first data point, and every technical finding was evaluated in relation to it. 14 months after opening Pierce Adaptive Mobility Center had served 163 patients. 61 had returned for follow-up evaluations as their needs changed. 19 had received service through the support fund at no cost. The center had a 4-month wait list. Donovan was not in the building every hour the way he had been in the garage. He had a team that could run evaluations without him present, which was the point. He was still the first person to see the most complex cases, the ones that didn't fit cleanly into a protocol where something was clearly wrong, but the numbers weren't saying so yet. That was the work that still required what he had, which was not credentials, but a particular quality of attention that credentials hadn't given him and couldn't replace. Miles still came after school. The desk by the window had been upgraded, a proper surface, a good lamp, a chair at the right height. He had become a familiar presence to the staff and to the regular patients, and he moved through the space with the ease of a child who had spent years learning to belong in whatever room he was in. Sabine came in on a Thursday in October for her scheduled quarterly assessment. She moved through the center with the ease of someone who had been there enough times that the space felt familiar rather than clinical. She and Renee ran the assessment together, Renee leading the technical evaluation, Sabine providing a clear account of how the chair had performed over the previous 3 months. Sustained seated work capacity was now approaching 3 hours before she needed a break. The compensatory tilt she had carried in her right shoulder for 9 months had resolved completely by month 4. She had returned to a painting class she had stopped attending 3 years earlier when the pain had made sitting through a 2-hour session impossible. She and Donovan spoke briefly after the assessment. She asked about the wait list. He told her 4 months and that they were looking at whether the space could be reconfigured to fit a second assessment room. She said she'd have someone look at the layout. After she left, Donovan stood by the window in his office and looked out at the parking lot, the leaf-bare trees along the block, the low October light turning everything amber and flat. He thought about the Tuesday morning 14 months ago when a $275,000 wheelchair had rolled across his concrete floor and he had heard something in the wheels before it cleared the threshold. He pulled open the bottom drawer of his desk. There was a stack of cards there, not organized, just collected. Notes from patients, some handwritten, some typed, a few on the back of appointment reminder slips. He didn't read them often. He kept them because they were a record of something real. He took one from the middle of the stack and read it again. "Thank you for believing the chair was the problem. Everyone else made me feel like the problem was me." He put it back. Miles appeared in the doorway with his backpack over one shoulder, ready to go home. "Is Sabine coming next week?" he asked. "Thursday," Donovan said. Miles nodded, looked around the office for a moment the way he sometimes did, not searching for anything, just taking in the room, and then said, "You ready?" Donovan put on his jacket and turned off the desk lamp. In the reception area, a woman was waiting for the last appointment of the day. She had been referred by her neurologist, who had noted in the referral letter that her power wheelchair had been evaluated twice in the past year and found to be within all operational specifications. The woman had asked the neurologist's office to please find somewhere else to send her because she had been in pain for 11 months and she was done being told the chair was fine. Donovan came through the door and introduced himself. He pulled a chair from against the wall and sat down at eye level with her, the way he always did, and he opened the assessment notebook to the first page. "Tell me exactly where it hurts," he said. She looked at him the way people looked at him when they had asked for something enough times that they had stopped expecting to receive it with a careful, provisional kind of hope. Then she told him. Sabine Laurent changed Donovan Pierce's life with resources and opportunity he had never had access to. But Donovan had changed hers first, not with money, not with credentials, not with a title, only by doing what no one else had thought to do, asking where it hurt and believing the answer. There are people in every room who have been told that what they're experiencing doesn't show up on the chart. People who have stopped saying it because no one responded when they did. Sometimes the most important thing one person can offer another isn't expertise or equipment. It's the willingness to listen as if the answer matters because it does. If this story stayed with you, consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it today. Stories like this one only reach the people who need them most when you help pass them along.